So welcome everybody to our next Spatial Solutions webinar. So I'm Chris Akin, president of Paratum Solutions, and today we have a kind of a different presentation with Jonathan Thomas from BMOC, the Building Maintenance Operation Consultants, talking about taking the pain out of the building turnover process. It's a little different, and I'll, excited to talk about it a little more. But about us, about Paratum, we are focusing on working with institutions on their geospatial GIS strategies and services side of the house, really working with organizations to be proactive, thinking ahead, and rather than being reactive. So if we can help them understand what they've got and where it's at from a spatial and mapping aspect, whether that's utilities or floor plans, the shutoff valves, all those assets that the facilities owners manage and operate. Let's figure out what you've got, where it's at, and then we can start making some decisions with it and interacting with some other systems and whatnot. So as I mentioned, we have Jonathan Thomas with BMOC here. This presentation, again, is a little different than some of our other ones. It's not pure GIS related. We're not talking about as much of the spatial aspect of things, but where this really dovetails in is, I would say that 99% of my conversations are with facility managers, with people dealing with the operations and maintenance side of the house. Those who are, experiencing the pain of not knowing where their assets are, or, the maintenance side of the house not being planned for early enough. But I always say that the golden ticket, that ideal, pathway, is if we can start having that discussion with the new construction side of the house. People that are building the buildings or doing major renovations. Unfortunately, those folks are not always thinking about the life cycle of buildings and the facilities and the assets. They're thinking about, the quick, get it done, get it built. Sometimes in the engineering world, sometimes thinks about the design, bid, build, walk away. But the operations and maintenance side are thinking about the 30 years of that or longer, 50, 60. So John and I have had some good conversations about this, and the presentation today is really talking about how to start having those conversations and the need to have those conversations early on in the process in the new construction side, how to start having those conversations to let those folks know that there's a big need down the line to have that information. So we're starting to have that conversation about, let's capture this information early on rather than not knowing where utilities are and finding them with a backhoe. Let's start planning for that ahead of time, with our building side of the house. So with that, Jonathan, I will pass it on to you. And before I forget, and Jonathan just commented in the chat, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to put them into the chat. That'll come to John and I directly, and we'll address them if it's appropriate during the conversation. If not, we'll hold them to the end. But feel free to throw those in the chat. John, I will pass it to you.
All right. Thanks so much, Chris. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Chris, thank you for this awesome opportunity to present with you. Thanks to Paratum Solutions, which is you, but I still want to go ahead and name drop everything. But this is awesome. Great thing that you're doing. We also believe in educating FM and participating in that process and encouraging peer-to-peer interactions. And let's go through this presentation with that in mind. In fact, this presentation is not a service that BMOC provides per se. We've consulted on it, but specifically, we believe this should be fully owned by FM, by facilities management, and that is going to make a more effective process. So, and I'll get into that more during the presentation. So, my name is Jonathan Thomas. Please call me John. I founded BMOC in 2015, really in large part to help solve this problem, which is the construction to building operations turnover process. I've been working in various asset management consulting capacities since 1998. It all focused on facilities ever since the day I got out of college. So it's been my full 100% of my career. Been doing FCA, preventive maintenance programming, capital planning strategy, facilities management, resource estimation, benchmarking, etc. And then the big one here is the new construction data acquisition and PM programming. This would be, I would argue, maintenance commissioning for new construction. And by and large, most of the work that I have done over the course of my career has served higher education, hospitals, county and municipal governments, K through 12. So MUSH, if anyone's familiar with that term. But it would be great if anyone could put into the chat what industry you're coming from. That would help me. I'm kind of keeping an eye on it as I go through this presentation. So if you have any sort of interesting, when I say facilities, I mean utilities as well. So facilities and utilities management. But if anyone's from manufacturing or oil and gas or transportation or anything like that, please feel free to enter that in the chat. Or if you're from that MUSH group, then enter that as well. So BMOC, we are not a software company. We are management consultants. But what we do involves software in a big way. We're trying to optimize our clients' facilities management operation or building maintenance operation, if you will. So we work with building maintenance organizations. We're consultants, but we're bottom-up consultants as opposed to a top-down consultant. I believe that every facilities management organization needs to be doing the service that we provide first in order for them to lead a high-performance maintenance organization. And the optimization problem we're solving, it's where you're trying to get the most value out of constrained inputs. The inputs to our optimization problem, what you see on the screen. And we are filling the gap left in asset management by these typical entities that you see on the screen. In many cases, FM will trust these organizations to try to support their asset management programming, and they only do a little piece or they misfire on a couple of pieces. But I'm not going to belabor that too far. Another thing I wanted to add, source material here it can be summarized in APA's operational guidelines for facilities maintenance. It was written by Doug Litweiler, as he was called. He recently passed away. And we're very sad about that. He was like a father and a brother to me, but it's this service here that brought us together. And he was my senior vice president for business development. He actually wrote this piece for APA. So if you want more information on it and you're an APA member, or if you have this resource, go check out this chapter on building turnover. It's something that BMOC as a whole is really passionate about, and it brought Lit and I together back in 2014. So this is ultimately, construction turnover is ultimately an asset management endeavor. And the asset life cycle is as follows: starts with conception, which is during planning and design, goes to the cradle, which is the installation and acquisition of the physical asset, goes to life, which is your operation and maintenance and the tracking of that history, of the work history on it. So that's preventive, corrective, routine, and compliance and predictive-based maintenance. And then finally, you have the renewal point. All during the life cycle of any asset, you should always understand the cost for its replacement and when it should be replaced. So economic life cycle is very important. And so today we're going to be focusing on the conception part of the asset life cycle, which is design and kind of going into the installation as well. So we're going to set the stage and talk up and give some context over the past 25 years of this process, and then talk about the turnover work group experiment at the University of Iowa, which was back around 2014. They had several new buildings coming online, and they were fed up with getting the proverbial expletive sandwich. You can fill in the blank there on the expletive, but that was the precise terminology that was used when this process was explained to me. We'll talk, and then part 3, it's going to be a lot of information, but this presentation is going to be available to you. So some of the information we'll talk about, it's going to be there, and I'm not going to talk about all of it, but you can go and download that presentation for reference. And then we'll talk about how to get it started in your organization. So here's a question for the chat. How many of you have been impacted in some way by a large capital project? And that can be a positive, a neutral, or a negative statement. So feel free to go in and enter into the chat I always like to hear people's stories about some of the things that they've experienced. I'm going to talk about a couple of them today, but it'd be really fun if you could enter anything that you've seen. And you don't have to do it right now. You can do it over the course of the presentation. So this is a problem that I've seen ever since I've been in industry. And the anecdote I like to use is building information modeling. Back in the 20-aughts, we were hearing about building information modeling and how we were going to be able to press a button and all the information was going to go from the design and construction team's model into via Kobe into my CMMS, and I'm immediately going to be able to start generating work orders. Problem with that was we were seeing things like faucets and floor drains and doorknobs and hinges get loaded into my CMMS as an asset, creating all sorts of problems because there was just nothing but noise in my asset database. That's just one example. I think there's a misalignment between the focus for design and construction and the focus for that facilities has, and we'll get to that in a minute. And it's a natural misalignment, and what we should do is balance those and not try to necessarily average them out, but appreciate them as two totally separate focuses and develop a process that links the two together rather than tries to bend one to another. Another problem, facilities generally has tunnel vision. You know, they're understaffed. Facilities, I haven't run into, none of my clients have said, man, I've got so much staff, I don't know what to do with them. It just doesn't happen. So facilities gets tunnel vision. They're surviving day to day. And they need to, they've got to stay focused on it. And sometimes when these design and construction projects come on, they say, well, I'll worry about it when I need to. And that's a problem as well. So both sides, I think, have been searching for a better way. We've seen, you know, everybody wants to win. It's not that one blows off the other or one ignores the other. It's just, it's that by the nature of the beast, everyone's focusing on their specialty. And through that, they get this poorly timed delivery of a project, and everybody's searching for a better way. So, so the big problem is that design and construction is focusing on the building for plus or minus 4 years, depending on the size of the project. Well, facilities has to worry about the building for plus or minus 50 years and has to go through all sorts of turnover, has to integrate this into their process. So through that comes a completely different perspective on the systems that are installed, what is specified, and you know, the quality of installation and how important it is for assets to get installed correctly, etc. So how do we transition these projects from construction to operation? Get that short-term view and create success for the long-term view. So Patrick Duke is big in this process, works in integrated project delivery, focuses in the hospital market, but he identified this need that resonated with us. Came from a magazine in 2015, but essentially, if the building is not guided guided throughout the construction process into operations, then the likelihood of it failing to meet the expectations of the programs, energy efficiency expectations, et cetera, and goals, the ability for the building to do that decreases. So the experiment that Litt and his colleagues did at the University of Iowa is called the Turnover Work Group. And it actually, the original documentation for it had a picture of a tugboat tugging a barge into port, which is a pretty good visual, if you will, with the tow process. So ultimately, their problems were as follows, or were what's listed here. These were the initial theses, if you will, for the tow experiment, the initial strategies. It grew obviously into a much more expansive effort, not expensive, expansive. As we'll see here, but primarily they had problems with the maintenance team getting trained on time. The preventive maintenance program was just hypothetical and it wasn't actionable. and it wasn't in their system. The asset information that was turned over was just, it made no sense whatsoever. They had students doing it at the time, and they couldn't tell the difference between a boiler and an air handling unit. So it was very problematic. And also they had a big problem with the operations and maintenance manuals. So that small thesis grew into this giant effort, and it may seem daunting at first, but everybody here's experienced it, and all these questions get answered at some point. They just, if you do it proactively, you have control over them, and they can be answered efficiently. If you do it reactively, they get answered. It's just with a lot more heartache and aggravation and inefficiency tied along with it. But as you can see here, the listed members of TOW include people from the construction team. That's the owner's construction project management team, area maintenance supervisor, building maintenance technicians, business unit representatives. So that would be any stakeholder that's involved there. And then they had a TOW coordinator. Sorry. Okay, so a couple of things to realize. It's not a planning and design function. Facilities has got to own this process. Next, it doesn't overlap with anything that's already being done as part of the project. So you're not overlapping with project meetings. Those meetings need to transpire like normal. This should be done with minimal impact. Minimal. I mean, there's going to be some impact, obviously, but it needs to be minimal impact on the project team, especially if it's something that you're doing in the middle of a project. So like the first time you're doing TOW and you're coming into the middle of a project, you need to be especially aware of that, because it's not fair for anybody to have this whole new initiative thrown on them in the middle of a project. Next, and this is obviously very important for any initiative in the management management, and that's having executive sponsorship. For an initiative like this, you must have approval from the top, and hopefully in your organization, design and construction and facilities is linked rather than in two separate silos. But if they are, it's still something that can be worked out. Again, everybody wants everyone else to succeed. That's what we've experienced generally in the market. Next, it should be this whole initiative should be all about inciting action and getting work done and problems solved. It shouldn't just be some theoretical group of people getting together, making each other feel like they're doing something. It's all about action. So it needs to be done formally and professionally. So you should keep documentation, you should have agendas, you should be proactive with your scheduling, and everybody should be accountable. People should encourage other peers to be on the group and then to do their work that's related to it. And this is generally what they experienced at the University of Iowa. With their TOW group, is that after the work was done, getting the project to come into operations was a much more enjoyable experience. Everybody was better prepared and everybody was getting along better. So now let's get into some of the topics that are included in TOW. And a lot of this is to get your your strategic mind on track and think about ways that you can make an impact on your organization through these. So obviously, any group needs to have a mission statement. They're very important. If you don't, the organization, especially the culture of an organization, can get out of control. So you need to have an opening mission statement that's repeated at the beginning of every meeting. And it needs to be tailored to the construction project, right? So you have to have a goal for that specific building. If there are initiatives that the building was brought on to fulfill with the institution at large, then those should be part of that mission statement. If you have energy efficiency goals, for example, I think one of the parts of the mission statement would be that this building actually achieves those goals and is able to sustain energy efficiency initiatives. And that is, there's a couple of implications there, which I'll get into as we go further through the presentation. TOW membership, make sure you have the right people there at the right time. You need to have champions on TOW, people that understand the goal and believe in it. And you need to have representation from all these entities in the group that we're showing here. Building operations and maintenance. So that's operating the building and maintaining the building. That can be conflated together, but those are two separate activities. Your landscape services, grounds, custodial, everybody needs to be a part of this so they can get in front of preparing for the building. Facilities asset management. We're in large organizations, we're starting to see asset managers come on board, and they're focused on keeping the asset database current and joining together the various software systems on a single asset database. Well, construction project for them represents a whole slew of new assets, maybe even in the thousands in some cases. And also some assets, if it's a renovation, that need to be retired. They need to be a part of this process. Energy management. And then the TOW coordinator is something that is new because of this. It assumes that the initiative has already been established. When we've helped organizations get these projects, get this initiative started up, they have hired somebody who is focused on TOW, and they interact very closely with the asset manager. Construction manager is listed here. They're intended to be a fly on the wall. We don't want them influencing the conversation too much, but we do want them to be observing it. The goal of this of TOW is to be focused on the ongoing usage and operation of the building. It's not, again, we don't want to make sure you're not overlapping with project meetings. We're not talking about something was replaced over here at this point and other contractors need to be prepared for it. We want to be focused on taking the building into operations. So for the FM personnel who's going to be involved, they need to have a specific role on the team and a set of responsibilities, and who they're going to get information from these meetings. Who do they need to go and then pass that information on to? So one of the goals of TOW is to take commitments that the design and construction team already has and organize them. So training and walkthroughs, all of these should be proactively plotted out and scheduled. That would be a role of the TOW group, just to make sure that everybody, all the stakeholders, know how important it is for them to attend them, and then make sure that they're scheduled at a time when they can be there. For custodial waste and recycling, now we're going to start getting into the weeds a little bit about the specifics. So how is that going to work in the building? And some of these comments that I'm listing here were brought up by actual experience in buildings. So if this incites a memory of yours, please put it in the chat. So had a building where the containers that were purchased for waste management could not fit inside the millwork that was developed for them as part of the project. So that brought up the question, who's responsible for making sure the right containers are purchased and when they're going to get there? Roll-around chairs. Some roll-around chairs were observed that were selected for the building, were observed to make marks on that particular type of flooring that was installed in a building. So is the maintenance of the flooring and other finishes considered? Example there was we had an air insulated interior window, soundproof window in a music building that had an air compressor associated with it. And you can only use a particular type of cleaning solution on the window. Does information like that get brought to the surface? Do you have a particular type of flooring that's going to be installed where if your custodial services group, if they apply their standard cleaning solution to it, is it going to erode the finish on that flooring? So do you need specialized cleaning solutions or tools, special rags, or special equipment like buffers and auto forwards. For ground, well, this is more of a ground. This is typically more for grounds, but where are the exterior dumpsters going to be located? Is there enough space for them? When the loading dock was designed, did it take into account the size of dumpster that was going to be applied, or is that something that's reactive at your organization, the sizing of the dumpster? You know, are you going to have a baler at the building? What other loading dock equipment do you have? Custodial equipment. Again, buffers and floor machines. Is the building big enough to justify its own set of equipment? Where does it get stored in the floor plan layout? Is there enough space? Do you need special shelving to accommodate the equipment? Confirm who will be responsible for the final pre-occupancy cleaning and when is that happening? And who's doing QA on it would be my question. So O&M manuals, that was one of their next topics of discussion. Who is going to review the manuals and by when? And are they delivered in a way that maintenance staff can use them? Or are they hidden away in a giant binder? Now, thankfully, the days of a giant bookshelf or two of O&M manuals are going away. I haven't seen one of those in a little bit here, but I remember in larger buildings, you'd have like a wall full of manuals. And that's good. It's good for you to have that reference material. These days, we're seeing huge PDFs and usually in chunks of 750 or 1,500 pages. Even if it's in PDF, it's not generally usable by maintenance staff. So keep that in mind. Maintenance staff generally needs O&M manuals on the fly and in a hurry. They're usually in the field when they're trying to access them. So getting a 750-page binder that they have to search through that is not related with the asset in the CMMS is very inconvenient. So who's thinking about this, both the manner in which they're delivered and the accuracy of them? Next, the asset management program integration. And this goes into what Chris was talking about at the beginning of the presentation. Getting existing systems aligned, getting the building integrated with your existing workflows and systems. So facilities management needs to own this process. This is when I was talking about the BIM and the COBE download before. This is one of those areas that I have seen frequently fail. Data is delivered late, and it's not consistent with what's already in the CMMS. But first, before we even get to that point, what are the division of labor, the staffing level, and the outsourcing requirements in the building? Has anyone taken a look at the plans and seen if there's specialty equipment there? Are there some new technologies that are being installed that your staff cannot manage? Do you have anybody, are there design alternatives that have been proposed? So an example I will give there is design alternative that I recently saw was having a 4-pipe fan coil unit system with central station air handling units and an air-cooled chiller and incremental boiler, and then versus a water source heat pump system. So typically when design alternatives are proposed by design engineers, they express return on investment only in terms of initial cost differential versus energy savings and payback on the energy savings. But no one looks at the maintenance costs, or they're assumed to be a wash in this calculation. But that's not true for facilities management. So the water source heat pump case is very interesting because fan coil unit system, yes, I've got filters all over the place. Both of the approaches have filters all over the place, which is suboptimal. You know, you want to minimize the number of filters you're replacing, but you prefer a VAV system. But even without that, with them both having filters all over the place, the water source heat pumps require a refrigeration, somebody who's licensed to deal with refrigeration to go visit that equipment very frequently every year. Whereas the fan coil units do not require somebody. Fan coil units can have a generalist or a low-level HVAC technician or mechanic on them. And staff is scarce, especially HVAC technicians. You don't have them growing on trees, especially when they're getting signing bonuses like quarterbacks get signing bonuses these days. So minimizing the amount of equipment that has refrigeration is a great idea, in my opinion, when it comes to facilities. Now, I'm not saying it's the only idea. It just needs to be taken account with all of the other information as well. Of course, the energy savings is very, very important, but it all needs to be balanced out in terms of cost, because everything else, as far as the O&M goes, also has an energy cost to it. So that should be considered as well, and it's not generally considered. But that's an example of a discussion that needs to be had with the tow group internally. Now, if there's an action item for the design and construction team coming out of that, obviously that's a different problem, and there's a lot of processes that have to be gone through there. But at least say you're stuck with a design alternative that is suboptimal for facilities, you just, hey, at least you know now before later, and you're able to prepare in advance for it. For example, I don't have enough HVAC technicians for this water source heat pump system. So maybe you outsource that labor, and have that discussion proactively and go ahead and get something in the works proactively where you can get a good deal on it, and maybe have multiple vendors bid on it before the systems get installed and they're already running to failure. So plan to complete a physical inventory and tagging exercise for the assets. This is one of the things that BMOC does. Again, think maintenance commissioning. It's a skill set that's not on the design and construction team. In many cases, even if the FM organization has a set of standards and they say, we want the data like this, the reality of that is the building of that building comes first for design and construction, and that's a complex effort. So they're going to focus on building the building and making sure it works. And sometimes that data, if they're on the hook for delivering it, it's going to be 6 months to 2 years late. And all that time, you're losing your maintenance histories on your assets every moment that those units are not in your CMMS. So that's a problem. But also the bigger problem is in the markets that we serve, typically when a new building is built, you have one design and construction team do it, and then the next building, you don't necessarily have that same design and construction team. So I heard it called Groundhog Day before. So you're in Groundhog Day where you're having to train one team to do it, and then you have to turn around and train another team to do it. And there's all the QA and the cajoling that goes along with that as well. There's a better way to do it. Facilities should own it. The data needs to be delivered on time, and it needs to be consistent with the data that's for the rest of your portfolio that is in your CMMS. Next, developing an effective preventive maintenance program. This is another thing where organizations will take for granted that the commissioning agent turning over O&M manuals is sufficient as the preventive maintenance program. I don't know how many on this call have actually spent a lot of time sifting through O&M manuals and reviewing PM procedure recommendations across many manufacturers. I have spent a lot of time doing this. First part of my career, I was getting generic PM procedures that were provided by RS Means, and found that they were very frustrating to use and very incomplete and outdated. Right now, they were done in about 1998, so they're about 26 years old right now. They haven't kept up with current technologies, and they weren't current with technologies back then either. OEM, so the pendulum swung the other direction. I went to developing OEM PM procedures and just taking them out of transcribing them from the various O&M manuals. And I found that they were all over the place. Turns out OEMs are not motivated to provide a full preventive maintenance program for their systems that include frequencies, that include sufficient steps. If one does it, they typically do it to protect themselves in a warranty claim. Others don't give you much information at all. I just recently had a water source heat pump domestic water heater that we went to the O&M manuals, a new system we hadn't seen yet, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of them. And oh, by the way, we now have another system that has refrigerant in it we can maintain with our scarcity of HVAC technicians. But anyway, the OEM didn't put any maintenance procedures in there, and they market their system as a low maintenance system. Well, yeah, you might market it as low maintenance. It's going to be low maintenance for a while, hopefully, but that unit has a refrigerant compressor in it. It needs to be maintained. it needs to be at least checked by somebody who's able to do that. So that's an example where the OEM did not provide any sort of a maintenance procedure for the unit, and you need to have a good PM procedure for it. And typically, you need to be applying best practices, and you need to be identifying what assets are similar to assets you already have in your portfolio, and then taking that PM procedure in your CMMS and applying them. So so this is a public service announcement. We have developed a book on preventive maintenance programming. This does contain PM procedures. It is current, and we work with organizations. You don't have to use our services to get it. It's available on our website, and we work with organizations just to get the PMs into their CMMS. That's one of the things that we'll do, or tasks we'll do with this book. So the goals for the asset management program should be that your PMs are coming out the day, your work order, PM work orders should be coming out the day is building turned over, the day the building is turned over. And when I say coming out, I mean at least scheduled. It might be 3 months, but this assumes that the filters that are installed during the construction project are replaced at building turnover. So first, that needs to be done. We've done work in buildings where we've seen the fan motors already begin their path to burning out because the filter racks were all caved in with construction dust. So that's another thing that I'm just going to throw out there. Someone needs to be watching that because asset preservation starts before that building is turned over. You want to make sure you're tracking your work against your assets even during the warranty period. So if the contractor is supposed to maintain the assets, first you need to make sure exactly what work they're doing. Are they just replacing filters? Are they just being on call to to do breakdown maintenance? How is that warranty set up? And then you need to act accordingly. But regardless, even during the warranty period, that's a crucial time for those systems where little adjustments might be made or something switched out, a motor, a controller, a VFD, something like that. It needs to be tracked in the CMMS because that could be critical information in the future for that asset. And note that when we mention preventive maintenance, we define preventive maintenance as combination of routine, preventive, predictive, and compliance-based maintenance. So really, you could call it proactive, but we use the term preventive because that's more understandable in the industry. So one tip on the O&M manuals, the preventive maintenance procedure doesn't tell you everything you need. And we also don't recommend transcribing every little bit of information that's in the O&M manual into your CMMS. So it's a great idea to have that O&M manual available to be quickly accessible from the asset record in your CMMS, because then you can get parts lists, you can get sequence of operations, you can get safety instructions, assembly instructions, disassembly instructions, torque ratings, all of this information that should be in the O&M manual and not in the PM procedure. And then have all that information uploaded, at least for major assets. There's going to be some straggling minor assets, but for major assets, get that information in the system prior to building turnover. So next, training. And there's a couple of different types of training that needs to transpire. One is on your technical staff. So this is various systems, controls applications, can be air handling units, heat recovery applications, heat recovery wheels, or runaround coils, or high efficiency systems. Get this process proactively organized and scheduled. Make sure that the service provider is providing somebody who's experienced with maintaining the systems and not just on kind of the high level design strategy, because that's going to leave people with a lot of questions. So take a look at the resume or credentials of the people who are going to be giving the presentation. And then when they're giving the training, make sure that it is actually that person giving the training. So that's another role of TOW, is to vet some of this, some of the training vet and organize the training activities, and be as proactive as possible with scheduling to make sure the right people are there. And that's a common theme throughout this whole process. Next, training of the customers. So facilities management has customers, the owner, the programs that are occupying the space, and they need to know how the building works. The funniest thing would be they're sitting in there and you have a daylighting system, and all of a sudden the shades start coming down and they think there's a ghost or something like that, or the lights will dim, or the building seems alive in some way, shape, or form. You might avoid some trouble calls or some superfluous work order requests if you can actually train them on the building proactively. That includes audiovisual equipment, includes in labs like isolation valves, includes security systems access. Do you have specific security protocols for the building? Do people have to come in and check in? What does that look like? Next is obviously safety. And this is just general information, but it should be integrated into TOW. Should be talking about having things like the fire life safety egress plans developed and vetted and made sure that they're made available as quickly as possible. And then there's the waste handling and disposal procedures. We see a lot of organizations that don't go into individual offices to pick up trash anymore, and they rely on the occupants to go deliver the trash to a central location on a floor or something when it's ready to go. So that's that waste stream process needs to be, the occupants need to be trained on that. Next, tools and equipment purchases. If there's any special equipment for maintenance, custodial, grounds, go ahead and get in front of that process early. Get the logistics set up, etc. Get in front of lead times. Warranty management. So going back to the contractor when they've got the building during the warranty period, make sure everyone's reviewed the documentation, have a full understanding of what's included in the warranty, because there is such a thing as I'm not going to touch that equipment because it's under warranty syndrome. And sometimes the warranty doesn't include full maintenance on the system. So this needs to be understood by the organization. It's very important. So next, maintenance agreements. So if I don't have the staff or I have highly specialized equipment, how am I going to get that, keep that equipment operating? Do I need to get an external service contractor? How about internally? Does your organization work with service level agreements, which is a great way, which is, I would say, a best practice for when you're bringing in a new building. Facilities gets with the occupant and says, okay, we're going to deliver this service, and this is this is how much it's going to cost for this building. Works a little bit better for custodial and grounds, I would say, than maintenance. Maintenance is kind of tougher, just because it doesn't scale with square footage like and service level, like custodial and grounds scales directly proportionally with space. But nonetheless, it's a good way of going about business to set expectations proactively. Stock management. So this includes attic stock and future stock. So when the construction project is done, there's going to be some leftover materials. Those materials need to be logged and inventoried and integrated into your parts or inventory management system. If you've got an inventory management system on campus that you're using, if it's through your CMMS or what have you, where you order parts, it's good for you to go ahead and log that attic stock, whether it's extra filters or floor tiles or ceiling tiles or pipe fittings, what have you. Next, for future stock and logistics, how are parts going to get delivered to that building? How does the building integrate into your internal campus or what have you parts stream? So do you have a place on the loading dock where parts are delivered for preventive maintenance activities? Do you have on your campus, are your techs putting belts on hangers outside air handling units as a parts location for belts or for having belts on hand? How many deep do you need to go? Who's buying those belts? Where are you going to store the filters for the building? Hopefully not in your mechanical rooms. I know none of you are doing that. There are no filters in anybody's mechanical rooms on this call, I guarantee. But anyway, it should just be tracked, right? It needs to be integrated into these processes. So as you can see, as I'm going through this, there's a lot to consider. And again, I reiterate that if it's not considered proactively, it will be considered reactively. It's all about doing it in an efficient manner. Next, safety. After the asset inventory or part and parcel with the asset inventory, do arc flash studying and labeling, lockout, tagout reporting. make sure the eye wash stations and safety showers are demarcated in accordance with your campus policies. If you have to, for fume hoods, do you have to delineate safe walking areas using tape or what have you? Is that taken into consideration? Are the roof tie-offs available and compliant? And are your material safety data sheets going to be delivered on time, and where are they going to be stored in the building? So waste stream management, we talked about this a little bit. How is that going to be done? What level of service is custodial services going to be providing? What are they expecting the occupants to do? Are there different waste streams for the building? All of this needs to be considered. And then finally, there's some other building operations concerns: building automation system and fault detection and diagnostics, other software applications, GIS. How is this building getting integrated into it? Are the utilities located on the GIS? When is that happening? And how are you getting that done? Is it consistent with the rest of your campus? Fire protection, information technology and security, and then finally security and access. So up there with custodial and grounds goes how the building is going to be secured with access, etc. So throughout this whole process, the reason why Lit was so excited about it was they got a lot of positive feedback. This right here is from one of the occupants in the buildings, one of their customers. And this is from one of the stakeholders, one of the members of TOW that was in their custodial services group. Yeah, so the assumption is typically with facilities and custodial and grounds is that it's a utility. It just gets done. It's very utilitarian and it'll happen, but it's not that simple, as many of you know. So ultimately, everybody benefits from this process, and that's how it should be. Planning, design, and construction should benefit the architects, the engineers. We've had stories where something came up for the architect to consider, and they were really good and receptive about it, and the architect made a change, and they were grateful about it because they learned about it early on, and it was going to be really easy to fix it then, and then rather than later on in the process. Or reactively or after they're all done. The design and construction team, they want everything done when they're done with the building. They don't want to be coming back to have to do anything. And then back to Patrick Duke, it's just the classic statement, always begin with the end in mind. That is true in everything in life. As best as we can, we should have our strategy when we go into the building, and then have that carry us through the entire process. So just some guidelines for TOW. You might be asking, okay, well, what does this look like? Ideally you can get in and get it kicked up 12 to 18 months before building turnover or substantial completion. And get your customers involved as early as possible. Again, emphasize the team. Everybody's in there to win. Avoid an us and them mentality. Again, it should not be looked at as punitive or disciplinary, and the tone of the group should not be punitive or disciplinary as well. There should be no condescending sort of language or tone in the communications. Continue to meet afterwards for lessons learned and how the contractor is managing the warranty period. To see how you're not going to see the full results of TOW until you're a few months into the life of the building. So continue to meet. Be professional with the meetings and formal. Keep agendas, send them out. Have a shared directory where all documentation is stored. Do not turn it into a project meeting. Make sure it stays on focus. This is one of the reasons for that operational statement or mission statement. And then focus on inciting action. It's not there for people just to sit there and share some good ideas. It's there to promote action and arrive at a place when that building's turned over where everybody's fully prepared and tracking the data and making sure that building is hitting its energy efficiency goals, etc. So to get started, today, if you go back and say, hey, I want to get started with doing something with TOW, we can help with getting it kicked up and provide some information that might be helpful. It's not some huge costly consulting project. It's basically just us providing some information and checklists. But identify a champion and then find other people who are tired of building. Hopefully you've got a reasonable amount of construction going on in your portfolio. That'd be a good thing. But hopefully you also have some people that are tired of poor building turnover processes. Get your champions together. They may have overlapping specialties. You'll find a place for them. It's okay. Get everybody who wants to be involved with it. Also, planning, design, and construction, what we found is we've got some specific anecdotes about this. We one time had a problem getting onto a job site one time to do our maintenance programming for a client during construction. They very wisely don't want anybody they want to keep their site free of people. They want to minimize the number of people coming onto their construction project. It's a safety issue. It's a liability issue. It makes perfect sense. But they also said that they didn't want us on there because they were already doing what we were doing. And any time they were asked to do something for facilities, their default position was always, yes, we will do it. And it comes from a spirit of customer service. They want to help. But some of the things that facilities was asking for, they were not, planning, design, and construction was not qualified to help. And what ended up happening is they would say they would do it. They would say that they are all about it and believe in it. But then when it came to actually getting it done, they didn't have the resources to actually get it done correct, both in skill level and in availability of labor. But ultimately, it wasn't because they were blowing facilities off. It was because they wanted to help. They just ultimately couldn't help. Develop a criteria to select tow projects. You don't need a tow for a little cosmetic renovation or a fit out for a program that's taking over a space. Identify a square footage threshold or an extent of renovation threshold that would qualify it for tow and make it a fairly automated process for getting tow kicked up or integrating into your tow group. Think win-win. It should be win-win for everybody. So everybody on the team, tow should be there to make sure everybody can succeed and that everybody can focus on their specialty. We don't want to overlap. We don't want people overlapping their tasks or doing something they're not qualified to do. tow should help with that process. Develop a new occupant orientation program that's focused on some of that training. Your customers will love that. They'll love being included. And then once it's going, continue to enhance and tailor the process to your organization's needs. And that's all I've got. I've left a few minutes for questions. And hey, cool.
Perfect.
Chris, great timing.
Yeah. I'm going to share my screen back again. Well, appreciate that, John. One of the questions that came in is, what's the typical best path to buy-in? And is that the threat of what could go wrong, or showing the value and doing things right from the start?
I think it's just it's the understanding that the questions are going to get answered eventually. You want control over how those questions get answered. A little bit of investment now is worth a ton of investment later. And it's the same thing with preventive maintenance programming. It's really the same discussion. It is, hey, we're going to be taking on this building, whether anybody likes it or not. Let's do it in a controlled manner.
Nice. And kind of dovetail to that. I mean, one of the things that I know always comes up when we discuss this is how do you get that buy-in? You know, are there people that are going to be resistant, you know, to having this conversation, and then how do you have that conversation and convince them to do that? And I'll get your take on it. But one thing that I know you and I have discussed is an example of new equipment that got bought, that got purchased, got installed, but it needs special cleaning. And, you know, if you don't coordinate with your custodial staff or whomever, they may use the standard cleaning equipment and ruin that brand new, whatever it is that you just purchased, that new fancy wall that's lead compliant.
Well, it was a floor finish, and it was a floor finish that was a resilient and it was supposed to have a long life cycle. But then, you go strip off the coating on that, and you've immediately killed it. I mean, so and it was all because of a cleaning solution. So yeah, I mean, there's savings there to have, but it's hard, those savings, there a little bit comes from here, a little bit comes from there, and it aggregates. It's tough to make an impact with that. And what we found is obviously organizational cultures vary. So how you sell this within your organization, you have to analyze how your organization is set up. You have to know the history. We've seen some planning, design, and construction groups that are very entrenched in what they do, and they're a really tough nut to crack. So I think the way to approach, let's say the worst case scenario, the best way to approach that is, hey, listen, I've got an initiative that I'm doing. I am going to run it. I'm not asking for anything from you, but open lines of communication, and we're going to do all the legwork. And I want you to be able to stay focused on what you're good at doing. We want you to be able to do your job better and not get all harangued and hung up on little nitpicky requests from us. If we make requests from you, we want it done in a controlled and systematic manner where we give them to you periodically, and we wait until we get enough built up to where we can actually come to you with a clear statement, and avoid redundancies. Like if it's just piecemeal, they're going to hear the same questions over and over again, right? Or the same comments. This is a way to get it to where they're not hearing the same thing over and over again. And if multiple questions are kind of grouped together, or multiple issues, well, you can consolidate them into sort of a better strategy for answering all three questions at once. So it's really there to help them stay focused on what they do best. So I mean, that's really how I would sell it. And then the other part is we understand how complex a construction project, where we don't understand how complex a construction project is. We just know it's complex. We want you to deal with those complexities and not our complexities.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, guys, we are right at the top of the hour here. Kind of slid right into it perfectly. If you have more questions, this is contact information for John and myself. We'd love to talk more about this. John and I are both very much focused on the kind of the inventory side of it, so we can start having preventive maintenance and operation plans. The discussion today, hopefully you kind of got a good idea, it was about getting ahead of that process so that we can start having that information passed on and coordinated ahead of time. John and I deal with it all the time of trying to go and figure out what's there and how it operates and how to deal with it. So let's try and be proactive on that. So with that, I want to say thank you for everyone for joining. With this, will get recorded and posted, but feel free to reach out to John and myself if you have any more questions.